Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer, and we are here once more with John Manning, and we are going to, in this video, incorporate his 4 pillars into some role play so you can see how it works from his perspective. So in this first role play, I'm going to be the buyer broker, and he's going to be the listing broker. And I have written an offer including a Form 22A financing contingency. My buyer has marked option A, and I have written 30, the number 30, into the blank space in that financing contingency, representing the day on which his seller can deliver the notice to perform.
Great. And then on the listing side, I don't like the idea of waiting until the closing date to be able to do anything about it if the buyer doesn't perform correctly with their financing.
So, John, in a perfect world, are you calling me because you've got my offer, or am I calling you and introducing my buyer to you?
No, I'm going to call you, Annie, because I'm going to have reviewed your offer, have it in hand, and I'm going to call you up and I'm going to get to the bottom of what's going on. What I'm looking for as a listing broker is, does this signal something bigger than just something on a form, and what's to be done in order to get to a meeting of the minds.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Ring, ring.
Hello.
Hi, Annie. This is John Manning at Remax on Market.
Oh, hey, John. I'm so glad to hear from you. My buyers will be thrilled to know you've called. I'm sure you're calling to tell me that your sellers have accepted our offer.
Thank you. Well, we're very grateful for the offer, and I have a couple of questions about your client's financing. I know we spoke already, but tell me a little bit more about their financing, please.
Well, like I told you, they are super qualified. In fact, they've already gotten an underwriting pre-approval. They are really qualified.
And at this point in time, are there any flags or outstanding items that need to be resolved?
No, they are ready to go.
So there's nothing that could cause their application to fail?
Well, nothing that I can think of.
Got it, got it. Okay.
Who knows, right? But nothing that I can. I want to be completely transparent with you, John. But there's nothing that I or they know of right now that could make their application fail.
Got it. So Annie, I see that they're requesting that the seller not have the right to give notice to perform on financing. What's driving that, please?
Oh, well, just common sense. I always put 30 days there.
Oh, okay. So you always put in all your contracts, you do that?
Yeah.
Got it.
It was 30 days by default for years in that provision.
Got it. So that's not a requirement that's come to you from the buyer in that instance then?
Well, it's their offer. I mean, they signed the offer.
Oh, of course, yeah. But it's your recommendation to them. It was not something that they felt passionately about and came to you on. Okay.
Absolutely.
Got it. So what is it about the buyer's financing is causing you to worry about the seller giving the notice to perform?
I'm not worried.
Oh, okay.
I'm not worried.
Got it. Because it is an issue for us on the seller's side. We don't want to wait 30 days, the closing date, before we can take action in the event, of course, very remote event, but we don't want to wait 30 days before we have any ability to react if there were a complete buyer failure to perform. Can you see that?
I can see that. No listing brokers ever said that before, but I can see that.
Yeah. Well, how are we supposed to waive the only tool we essentially have as sellers to get out of the transaction if the buyer doesn't live up to their commitment in that financing contingency?
Okay, let me talk to my buyer. Do we still have more time if I can talk to my buyers about this?
Absolutely. That's why I'm calling. And if you could get back to me in the next hour, I would really appreciate it.
What number do you want to see on that blank?
I would like to see 2 weeks, please.
14 days?
Yes.
Okay, well, let me talk to them.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so every transaction, every negotiation plays out that way, right, John? It's just that easy?
No, it's not. And there's of course the outcome, and there's also how we represent our clients, right? There is a point where you're not going to win every single negotiation you go into, and so you can't be committed to only one outcome. But maybe I ask for 14 and I get 18. Maybe I ask for 14 and I find out that there's a fundamental problem with this buyer's financing that they were desperately hoping to hide, but they can't possibly be in this contract if they're going to get called to account.
Right.
So sometimes you win when you lose, even.
So I want to pick up on the 4 pillars good communication. John picked up the phone, John called me. He didn't text message me and say, what's up with this 30 days on the Form 22A? He established a relationship with me. He also demonstrated mastery of the forms in the context of knowing the significance of having that 30-day closing and a 30-day 22A. Effectively, the buyer's got a financing contingency all the way until closing. John recognizes that as the listing broker, and he explains that to his seller. He establishes professional credibility with his seller by being able to point that out to his seller. He approaches the conversation with me in a professional, courteous way. He pulls me along so that I give him the answers that he's ultimately hoping to get. He gives me that promise of trust. Yes, we will give you time to make a counter offer. We'd like to see 14 days. He doesn't tell me that that's the only thing they'll accept, but he extends this promise of trust that if we if we withdraw and resubmit a new offer, 14 days, his sellers are there, and then clarity of outcome, we're going to have a transaction. Yeah. Anything to add to?
Just that I'm of course putting pressure on you. This is not a fun conversation. This is a conversation where I require this to, but I'm not going to just call you up and tell you, I require this, do it now. Right. You can't do that and with any sort of a hope of success on a regular basis. So what I was attempting to do in this role play, Annie, was to uncover for you our perspective and why you actually used the word fair, I believe, and at one point, and the fairness, when you see that I'm only asking for fairness as well, it makes it far easier to bridge those gaps in communication.
John, something we have not yet talked about in this video series, even though I've talked about the fact that we're going to talk about it several times and we haven't yet talked about it. I was really nice as the buyer broker getting this response from you. I don't suspect that, well, maybe in today's market, maybe buyer brokers are by and large very nice and very courteous in a conversation like this because they're trying to get their buyer into mutual acceptance. But how would you have handled that? Would you have ever handled that differently if I had said something, less gracious, like, what are you talking about? Don't you know anything about financing? Buyer could lose their job the day before closing. Nobody puts 14 days on that provision. Yeah. It's always 30 days. What, yeah. Are you new?
Yeah. Well, there's two parts to the answer to that. The first part is I would have gotten with my seller and ascertained with them if or not it is a deal breaker for them. And the point we're talking about is immaterial. Any point that I am being called on to negotiate, it's got to be very clear. Is it a deal breaker for you, Mr. or Mrs. Seller? Sorry. Is it a deal breaker for you, seller, or not? And if it is not a deal breaker, then may I at least attempt to negotiate this because it may uncover information we don't have. And that in and of itself might be a win, because their absolute refusal to budge could call into consideration the veracity of what they're telling me.
Right.
So I'm not saying I have to get my way, obviously as the listing broker I have a tremendous amount of power in a competitive market. It's not always that way though, but irrespective of that, I'm information gathering on my CEO's behalf, my seller, right?
And from the buyer's perspective, buyer broker has to be prepared. Buyer broker has told their buyer, look, we always put 30 days here. This is totally normal. This is not going to be an issue. This isn't where we're going to have the fight. We're going to have the fight over the purchase price. And then all of a sudden the seller comes back, no fight over the purchase price, but wanting to talk about this 30-day provision. So now as buyer broker, I'm going to have to go back to my buyer, and how do I handle that?
Well, how the buyer presents that how the buyer's broker presents that to their buyer, I'm sure there's a million ways to do it. But at the end of the day, what I attempted to do in the role play, hopefully successfully, is to create a theme with the buyer's broker of fairness to take back to their client, to say, okay, the listing broker has called us. I did try to go really aggressively in protecting you. I tried to, make sure that the seller could do absolutely nothing about it, even if we didn't apply for financing. But they spotted it, and so it's probably not going to happen. So they're asking for 14 days, which is a little aggressive. But now you, Mr. Buyer, are presented with a choice. You can accept their 14-day request, or you can counter back. Of course, there's risk to both sides. On the one hand, you could receive a notice to perform after 14 days, but on the other hand, if you try and go for 30 or stay up there, maybe they pass on your offer and go somewhere else.
Okay.
And so, buyer, you must now make it an informed choice based on what I've told you. I would definitely, one thing I would say is I would never make that choice on my buyer's behalf.
No, so my response of saying, let me talk to my buyer and get right back to you.
Yeah.
That's what the buyer broker needed to do in any event.
And that's a huge point. I think as brokers, we're often in a rhythm of work, and we have a certain amount of certainty in how we do business, and we know what we know, and it can be easy for us to make decisions on our buyers or sellers' behalf without realizing that we're actually crossing lines. And Annie, you could talk to the consequences of crossing those lines much better than I can, but certainly making a decision that did not originate with the buyer or the seller is a very dangerous game.
The revised forms, they give brokers so much more latitude in the negotiations, and a lot of the changes were subtle, but think about the change to the earnest money provision. You now get to negotiate how many days. You always could, of course, but now there's an easy platform for negotiating how many days before buyer's earnest money is going to be due. What if buyer wrote 30 days for their earnest money delivery date on a 30-day closing? You have the ability to negotiate not only option A in the financing contingency, but option B. What if a buyer chose option B, listing broker's not paying attention, and buyer broker writes 30 on the option B? Financing contingency, so there is the forms revisions this time around in 2021 created a lot of latitude, more latitude for negotiation than there was before, which creates more opportunity for these negotiations, these building of good communications on these pillars.
And it requires more sophistication now. You have to understand as a listing broker the consequences of your actions. And a great illustration right now is the number of cases where listing brokers have delivered contracts without the competing offer attached. And that's causing ripples in the pond right now. It's a big deal. So not understanding the levers that we pull and push as listing brokers in a transaction, and the full legal consequences that can take place as a result of failing to know what you're doing properly. It's pretty frightening stuff, and with the increased negotiability comes increased responsibility. We are, after all, in a legal profession, whether we like it or not.
If you have questions on this topic or any other, send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.